On May 14, 1945, a kamikaze pilot named Tomi Zai did something that seemed impossible. As his Zero fighter screamed toward the deck of the USS Enterprise at 350 miles per hour, the massive carrier executed a desperate turn to starboard. Zai would miss. Every calculation said he would miss. But in a maneuver that would be studied for decades, Zai rolled his aircraft inverted, dove beneath the turn, and slammed into the forward elevator with devastating precision. The explosion tore through the flight deck, sent flames erupting 400 feet into the air, and killed 14 men instantly. For the third time in the war, Japanese headquarters announced they had sunk the USS Enterprise. For the third time, they were wrong. Because the ship the Japanese called the Gray Ghost, the carrier they claimed to have destroyed at the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, again at the Battle of Santa Cruz, and now off Okinawa, refused to die. This is the story of the most decorated warship in United States naval history. The story of a ship that fought in nearly every major naval battle of the Pacific War. The story of a vessel that was hit by bombs, torpedoes, and suicide planes more times than any other American carrier, and survived them all. The story of how one ship earned 20 battle stars, more than any warship in American history, and became a legend that terrified the Imperial Japanese Navy. This is the story of USS Enterprise, CV-6, the ship that wouldn't sink. The Gray Ghost, Act 1. Birth of a Legend. On October 3, 1936, at the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Virginia, a ship was born that would change naval warfare forever. Sponsored by Mrs. Lulie Swanson, wife of Secretary of the Navy. Claude Swanson, the hull-designated CV-6, slid into the waters of the James River. She was the 7th United States Navy vessel to bear the name Enterprise, a name with a legacy stretching back to 1775, when the Continental Congress captured a British sloop and rechristened it to embody the American spirit of bold action. But this Enterprise was different. She was a Yorktown-class aircraft carrier, 809 feet of steel, wood, and American industrial might. She displaced 19,800 tons. Her 4 steam turbines generated 120,000 shaft horsepower, pushing her to a top speed of 32.5 knots. She carried up to 90 aircraft and a crew of 2,200 men. When she was commissioned on May 12, 1938, under the command of Captain Newton White, the United States Navy had only 6 fleet carriers. The age of the battleship was ending, though few admirals would admit it. The age of the aircraft carrier, the age of Enterprise, was about to begin. For 3 years, she trained. She conducted exercises in the Atlantic. She sailed through the Caribbean. She transitioned to the Pacific Fleet in April 1939, joining her sister ship Yorktown at Naval Base San Diego. Her pilots practiced dive bombing and torpedo runs. Her gunners drilled on the 5-inch 38 caliber anti-aircraft batteries that ringed her deck. Nobody knew they were preparing for the greatest naval war in human history. Nobody knew Enterprise would become the tip of the spear. December 7, 1941, the day that saved her. On December 7, 1941, USS Enterprise should have died before her legend even began. She should have been at Pearl Harbor. Admiral William Halsey, commanding Task Force 8, built around Enterprise, had departed Hawaii on November 28, with orders to ferry Marine Fighter Squadron 211 to Wake Island. The mission had taken longer than expected. Bad weather. Refueling delays. By December 7th, Enterprise was still 215 miles west of Pearl Harbor, steaming toward home. At 6:18 a.m., as the sun rose over the Pacific, Enterprise launched 18 Douglas SBD dauntless dive bombers for routine patrol ahead of the task force. Lieutenant Commander Howard Young led the formation toward Oahu. At 7:48 a.m., as these dauntlesses approached Pearl Harbor from the west, 183 Japanese aircraft from 6 carriers hit the American Pacific Fleet with devastating precision. What happened next would become legend. Commander Young's pilots arrived over Pearl Harbor to find it engulfed in flames. Battleship Row was a furnace. The USS Arizona had exploded with such violence that 1,177 men died in seconds. Oil burned on the water. Smoke climbed miles into the sky. And Young's unarmed scout planes, carrying no torpedoes, no bombs, only light defensive machine guns, dove into hell itself. Lieutenant Clarence Dickinson, flying SBD-6B3, spotted a formation of Val dive bombers pulling out of their attack runs. With no weapons that could hurt them, Dickinson did the only thing he could. He dove straight at them, forcing the Japanese pilots to break formation. One Val, trying to evade, crashed into a hillside. Multiple Enterprise pilots engaged Japanese fighters with their .30 caliber rear guns. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, attacking against impossible odds.
5 Dauntlesses were shot down.
9 pilots and gunners died trying to defend a base they'd only been trying to reach for breakfast. But they fought. While the battleships burned and thousands died, the pilots of Enterprise fought. And 215 miles to the west, the carrier herself received the radio transmission that changed everything. AR Raid, Pearl Harbor. This is not drill. Admiral Halsey's response was immediate. Battle stations, general quarters, prepare for combat. Enterprise, by pure chance, by a delayed ferry mission and bad weather, had been spared the catastrophe. She was now the only operational American carrier in the Pacific. The entire Japanese combined fleet was somewhere out there. 6 carriers had just annihilated Pearl Harbor. They could be coming for Enterprise next. Halsey ordered full speed. Enterprise raced toward Pearl at 30 knots, launching additional search planes to find the enemy fleet. Her fighter pilots flew combat air patrol with sweat running down their faces and hands shaking on the control sticks, scanning the horizon for the dive bombers they knew could appear at any moment. But the Japanese had already turned north. Admiral Chuichi Nagamo, cautious despite his victory, withdrew rather than search for the American carriers he knew must be at sea. It was a decision that would haunt Japan for the rest of the war, because Enterprise had survived. And she was very, very angry. First Blood. On December 10th, 1941, just 3 days after Pearl Harbor, Enterprise drew first blood. A patrol of SBD Dauntlesses from Scouting Squadron 6, led by Lieutenant Commander Halstead Hopping, spotted a surfaced Japanese submarine 200 miles north of Oahu. The submarine was I-70, a Type J-2 fleet submarine, part of the reconnaissance screen that had supported the Pearl Harbor attack. The Dauntlesses dove. I-70 crash-dived, but she was too late. Lieutenant Clarence Dickinson, the same pilot who had fought over Pearl Harbor with no weapons, dropped a 500-pound bomb that detonated directly alongside the submarine's pressure hull. The explosion was catastrophic. I-70 broke apart and plunged to the bottom, taking all 81 crew members with her. She was the first full-sized enemy warship sunk by American forces after the declaration of war. Enterprise had made her first kill. It would not be her last, not by a long measure, because for the next 4 years, the Gray Ghost would hunt across the Pacific like a predator that could not be stopped, could not be sunk, and would not quit until the Empire of Japan lay in ruins. Asset II, striking back. The Marshall and Gilbert Islands raids. In early 1942, the United States was losing the war in the Pacific. Wake Island had fallen. Guam was gone. The Philippines were collapsing. The Japanese were advancing through Southeast Asia like a tsunami. Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, one by one, they fell. The rising sun flew over half the Pacific. American morale was shattering. Washington needed a victory. Any victory. Something to prove that America could strike back. On February 1st, 1942, Admiral Halsey, aboard Enterprise, leading Task Force 8, launched the first American offensive operation of the Pacific War. The target, Japanese bases in the Marshall and Gilbert Islands, deep in enemy-controlled waters. At dawn, Enterprise and Task Force 8 appeared off Kwajalein Atoll like ghosts. The Japanese garrison had no warning. Radar was primitive. American carriers were supposed to be running, defending, retreating, not attacking 2,000 miles from Pearl Harbor in the heart of Japanese territory. Enterprise launched 37 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers and 9 Grumman TBD Devastator torpedo bombers. They hit Kwajalein, Roy Namur, and Wotje with devastating precision. Bombs rained on fuel depots, barracks, and anchored vessels. 3 Japanese ships were sunk, including the light cruiser Katori-class vessel and several support ships. 17 Japanese aircraft were destroyed on the ground or in the air. American losses: 1 plane. The raids continued through February. Halsey took Enterprise to Wake Island, where the Marines had fought to the last man in December. On February 24th, Enterprise aircraft bombed Japanese positions with cold fury. They destroyed 2 patrol boats and shore installations. They shot up the airfield until nothing moved, and then they vanished back into the Pacific before the Japanese could respond. The raids achieved little strategic value. A few ships sunk, some supplies destroyed, maybe 200 Japanese casualties. But the psychological impact was seismic. Americans had struck back. Enterprise had penetrated Japanese-controlled waters and hit them where they thought they were safe. In Washington, President Roosevelt announced the raids with triumph. Newspapers called Halsey Bull Halsey. Enterprise became famous. And in Tokyo, Japanese naval officers looked at maps and realized that American carriers were not going to play defense. They were going to fight. The Doolittle Raid, supporting the impossible. In early April 1942, Enterprise was assigned to protect the most audacious operation in American military history. 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers sat on the deck of USS Hornet, another carrier sailing toward Japan. The bombers were led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, a legendary pilot who had convinced Washington that Army bombers could launch from a carrier deck, bomb Tokyo, and fly on to land in China. It was insane. B-25s were twin-engine medium bombers never designed for carrier operations. They had no tail hooks. They couldn't land on a carrier. The plan was one way: launch, bomb Japan, and pray they reached China before running out of fuel. Enterprise's role was to escort Hornet and provide combat air patrol and anti-submarine protection. If the Japanese found them, Enterprise's fighters would hold them off while Doolittle's bombers launched. On April 18, 1942, 650 miles east of Tokyo, farther than planned because a Japanese picket boat had spotted them and forced an early launch, Doolittle's 16 B-25s roared down Hornet's deck and climbed into the sky. Enterprise's radar operators tracked them. Her fighter pilots flew cover. Her lookouts scanned for enemy aircraft. The bombers disappeared over the horizon toward Tokyo. Hours later, news reached the task force. Tokyo had been bombed. Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya. American bombs had fallen on the Japanese homeland. Damage was minimal, but the psychological impact was catastrophic. The Japanese military had promised the emperor that the homeland was invulnerable. That promise had just been shattered. But the Japanese response was swift and terrifying. Radio intercepts confirmed that the Imperial Japanese Navy had sortied every available carrier and surface ship to hunt down the American task force. Admiral Yamamoto himself was coordinating the response. The net was closing. Halsey ordered full retreat at maximum speed. Enterprise and Hornet raced east, their crews at battle stations for 36 hours straight, waiting for the dive bombers that could appear at any moment. They never came. Enterprise escaped again, vanishing into the vast Pacific like a ghost. But the Doolittle raid, and Enterprise's role in protecting it, forced Japan into a fatal decision. They needed to eliminate the American carriers once and for all. They needed to draw the U.S. Pacific Fleet into a decisive battle and destroy it. They chose Midway. And Enterprise would be there, waiting. The Battle of Midway. Turning point. On June 4, 1942, the fate of the Pacific War was decided in 5 minutes. Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown formed Task Forces 16 and 17, stationed northeast of Midway Atoll. American codebreakers had deciphered Japanese plans. Admiral Yamamoto was bringing 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, plus battleships, cruisers, and hundreds of aircraft to capture Midway and annihilate the American fleet. The Japanese thought they had surprise. They didn't know the Americans were already there, waiting in ambush. At 5:30 a.m., Enterprise launched search planes. By 7 a.m., Midway-based aircraft had spotted the Japanese carrier force 240 miles to the northwest and were already attacking, with no success. Japanese Zeros shredded the slow, obsolete American torpedo bombers. At 7:02 a.m., Admiral Raymond Spruance, now commanding Task Force 16 from Enterprise, made a decision that changed history. He would launch everything, immediately, at maximum range, to catch the Japanese carriers while their planes were rearming and refueling. At 7:52 a.m., Enterprise launched 33 SBD Dauntless dive bombers, 14 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, and 10 F-4F Wildcat fighters. Hornet launched her strike. Yorktown followed. What happened next was catastrophe and miracle combined. The torpedo squadrons, Torpedo 8 from Hornet, Torpedo 6 from Enterprise, found the Japanese fleet first. They attacked at wave-top height, slow, vulnerable, with no fighter escort. The Japanese Zeros massacred them. Of the 41 Devastator torpedo bombers that attacked, 35 were shot down. Torpedo 8 was annihilated. All 15 aircraft destroyed. Only 1 pilot survived. Lieutenant Commander Eugene Lindsay, leading Torpedo 6 from Enterprise, died with most of his squadron. Not a single torpedo hit. But the sacrifice had drawn the Japanese combat air patrol down to sea level, swarming the torpedo bombers in a feeding frenzy of destruction, which meant the sky above was empty. At 10:22 a.m., 37 SBD Dauntlesses from Enterprise and Yorktown, led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey from Enterprise, emerged from the clouds at 14,000 feet directly above the Japanese carrier fleet. Below them, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu sat undefended, their decks crammed with aircraft, fuel lines running, bombs and torpedoes exposed. McCluskey rolled into his dive. "Attack! Attack! Attack!" The Dauntlesses screamed down at 250 miles per hour, 70-degree dive angles, wings screaming. Japanese anti-aircraft fire erupted. Zeros tried to climb. Too late. At 10:25 a.m., Three 1,000-pound bombs hit Akagi. She exploded. At 10:26 a.m., 4 bombs hit Kaga. Fires engulfed her. At 10:28 a.m., 3 bombs hit Soryu. She was doomed. In 5 minutes, 3 Japanese fleet carriers were burning wrecks. By evening, all 3 had sunk. Hiryu, the 4th carrier, counterattacked. Her dive bombers found Yorktown and crippled her with 3 bomb hits. Her torpedo bombers hit Yorktown with 2 torpedoes. Yorktown went dead in the water, but Enterprise hunted Hiryu down. At 5 p.m., 24 SBD Dauntlesses from Enterprise and the orphaned Yorktown squadrons attacked. 4 bombs hit Hiryu. She burned through the night and sank the next morning. 4 Japanese fleet carriers destroyed. Over 300 aircraft lost. 3,057 Japanese personnel killed, including many of Japan's most experienced pilots. American losses: Yorktown and the destroyer Haman, plus 145 aircraft and 307 personnel. The Battle of Midway was over. Japan would never recover. The empire had reached its maximum extent. From this moment forward, it would only retreat, island by island, defeat by defeat, until fire fell on Tokyo itself. And Enterprise, bloodied, exhausted, her deck crews working 20-hour shifts, her pilots flying until they collapsed from fatigue, sailed for Pearl Harbor to rearm and refuel. The war was just beginning, and the Gray Ghost had become a legend. Act 3, The Bloody Autumn Guadalcanal, The Meat Grinder. In August 1942, the United States invaded Guadalcanal, a mosquito-infested jungle island in the Solomon Islands chain that nobody had heard of and few could locate on a map. It became the most brutal campaign of the Pacific War. For 6 months, Marines and soldiers fought in the jungle against Japanese forces who would rather die than surrender. Malaria, dysentery, and tropical diseases killed as many men as bullets. Supply lines were desperate. The island was a hellhole, and the seas around it became a graveyard. Enterprise was the shield. While Marines died on the beaches and in the jungle, Enterprise and the Pacific Fleet carriers fought to control the waters around Guadalcanal. If the Navy lost, the Marines would be cut off, starved, annihilated. On August 24, 1942, the Battle of the Eastern Solomons erupted. Japanese carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku, searching for the American fleet, launched strikes against Enterprise. At 4:45 p.m., the attack came. Over 30 Valdive bombers, escorted by Zeros, broke through the combat air patrol and dove on Enterprise. The ship's gunners opened fire with everything: 5-inch anti-aircraft guns, 40mm Bofors, 20mm Oerlikons. The sky filled with bursting shells and tracer fire. F-4F Wildcats from Enterprise's fighter squadron tore into the formation, shooting down multiple attackers. But 3 bombs hit. The first struck near the aft elevator, penetrating to the 3rd deck before exploding. The blast killed 35 men instantly and started massive fires. The second bomb hit near the number 1 elevator, blowing a 10-foot hole in the flight deck and killing another dozen men. The third bomb hit the flight deck, but miraculously, it penetrated and exploded in a compartment filled with mattresses and bedding, which absorbed much of the blast. Enterprise shuddered. Flames roared from her elevator shafts. Black smoke poured into the sky, and her crew fought like demons. Damage control parties charged into burning compartments. They dragged wounded men from the fires. They sealed bulkheads. They fought the flames with hoses, with foam, with their bare hands. 1 hour after the attack, Enterprise was recovering aircraft. 3 hours after the attack, she was launching strikes. The Japanese announced they had sunk Enterprise. Radio Tokyo broadcast celebrations. Newspapers printed the news. Admiral Yamamoto logged it in official reports. Enterprise sunk in the Eastern Solomons. But Enterprise was still there, still fighting, still launching strikes. The Gray Ghost had earned her name. The Battle of Santa Cruz, bloodied but unbroken. On October 26, 1942, Enterprise fought the bloodiest carrier battle in naval history. The Battle of Santa Cruz was mutual annihilation. Hornet and Enterprise formed the American carrier force. Shokaku, Zuikaku, Zuiho, and Junyo formed the Japanese carrier force. Both sides launched everything. At 9:10 a.m., Enterprise launched her strike. SBD Dauntlesses and TBF Avenger torpedo bombers screaming toward the Japanese fleet 200 miles away. Simultaneously, Japanese strike aircraft were inbound toward Enterprise and Hornet. At 10:11 a.m., the Japanese found Hornet. Wave after wave of dive bombers and torpedo bombers attacked. Hornet was hit by 4 bombs, 2 torpedoes, and 2 crashed aircraft. She was dead in the water, burning, abandoned. She would sink that night. Enterprise launched more strikes to protect Hornet. She recovered aircraft from Hornet. Her fighter pilots flew until their guns ran dry and their fuel tanks read empty. And then the Japanese found her. At 11:21 a.m., dive bombers broke through the combat air patrol. Enterprise twisted and turned, her engines screaming at full power, her rudder hard over, executing emergency maneuvers so violent that aircraft in the hangar deck broke loose from their tie-downs. One bomb hit, penetrating the flight deck and exploding in a boiler room. The blast killed 40 men and reduced Enterprise's speed to 26 knots. Minutes later, another wave attacked. A second bomb hit the flight deck near the forward elevator. The explosion blew a massive crater in the deck and killed another dozen men. A near-miss bomb detonated close alongside, spraying the ship with shrapnel and killing more crew. Enterprise was hurt. Blood ran on her decks. Fire raged below. Her anti-aircraft guns were choked with smoke. Wounded men screamed in the medical bays. But she kept fighting. Her SBD Dauntlesses hit Shokaku with 4 bombs, crippling her. Zuiho was hit and damaged. Japanese carriers burned just as American carriers burned. At 2:15 p.m., yet another Japanese strike attacked. A kamikaze, one of the earliest suicide attacks of the war, though not yet formalized into doctrine, dove at Enterprise. Anti-aircraft fire shredded the aircraft. It missed by 50 feet, crashing into the ocean and throwing water across the flight deck. By 4 p.m., the battle was over. Both sides withdrew, battered and bloodied. Hornet sank. Enterprise was heavily damaged, limping at reduced speed, her flight deck a mess of craters and twisted steel. And for the second time, Tokyo announced Enterprise had been sunk. Newspapers ran headlines. Radio broadcasts celebrated. The Gray Ghost was dead. Except she wasn't. Enterprise limped to Noumea, New Caledonia, for emergency repairs. Welders worked around the clock. Steel plates covered the bomb craters. Damaged equipment was replaced. Within 2 weeks, Enterprise was operational again. But now she was the only American carrier in the entire South Pacific. Saratoga was torpedoed and under repair. Wasp had been sunk by a submarine. Hornet was gone. Yorktown was at the bottom of the Pacific. Enterprise was alone. One carrier against the Imperial Japanese Navy. And she held the line. For 2 months, from October to December 1942, Enterprise was the sole American fleet carrier operational in the Pacific. Her pilots flew themselves to exhaustion. Her crew worked 18-hour shifts. Her boilers ran so hot, the engineers worried they would explode. But she held Guadalcanal. The Marines survived. The Japanese convoys were attacked. The island remained in American hands, and the legend grew. The night actions and desperate hours. In November 1942, the Japanese made one final attempt to destroy the American forces on Guadalcanal. The naval battle of Guadalcanal erupted on November 12th to 15th, a chaotic, brutal series of surface engagements fought at point-blank range in the darkness. American and Japanese battleships, cruisers, and destroyers blasted each other to pieces in the waters off Guadalcanal in some of the most savage naval combat ever recorded. Enterprise couldn't participate directly. Her mission was to provide air cover, but her aircraft flew constant strikes. Her SBD Dauntlesses attacked Japanese battleships. Her fighters strafed enemy transports. Her torpedo bombers hunted destroyers in the darkness. On November 14th, Enterprise aircraft attacked the Japanese battleship Hiei, which had been crippled in the surface battle the night before. Wave after wave of dive bombers and torpedo bombers attacked. Hiei absorbed dozens of hits, bombs, torpedoes, rockets, until she was a flaming wreck. She sank that evening, the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. 2 days later, Enterprise aircraft attacked a convoy of Japanese transports attempting to land reinforcements on Guadalcanal. The transports were beached, their troops waiting ashore. Enterprise's planes destroyed them, all of them. 7 transports burning on the beaches. Thousands of Japanese soldiers killed before they could unload their equipment. The naval battle of Guadalcanal was an American victory, costly, brutal, but decisive. Japan would never again attempt a major reinforcement of Guadalcanal, and Enterprise, flying more sorties than any other carrier, operating without relief, became the backbone of American naval power in the South Pacific. Her pilots were exhausted. Her crew was pushed beyond human limits. Her aircraft were worn out, patched together with salvaged parts and prayers. But she didn't quit. The gray ghost never quit. Act 4. The counteroffensive, Tarawa, to the Philippines. In late 1943, Enterprise finally got relief. New Essex-class carriers were arriving, larger, faster, carrying more aircraft. The tide had turned, but Enterprise didn't rest. She joined Task Force 58, the Fast Carrier Task Force, the single most powerful naval formation ever assembled. 10 carriers, 6 battleships, dozens of cruisers and destroyers, over 900 aircraft. Enterprise became one blade in a sword that would carve through the Japanese Empire. In November 1943, she supported the Marine invasion of Tarawa, providing air cover as the Marines fought through the bloodiest 76 hours of the Pacific War. Her fighters shot down Japanese aircraft, attempting to counterattack. Her dive bombers blasted shore defenses. In January 1944, she struck Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands, the same island she'd raided in 1942. This time, she wasn't raiding. She was conquering. American forces invaded and captured Kwajalein in brutal fighting. In February 1944, Enterprise participated in Operation Hailstone, the devastating raid on Truk Lagoon, Japan's Gibraltar of the Pacific, the massive naval base in the Caroline Islands. Task Force 58 struck Truk with over 400 aircraft in a 2-day raid that sank 12 Japanese warships, 32 merchant vessels, and destroyed 275 aircraft. Truk, once considered impregnable, was neutralized in 48 hours. Enterprise's aircraft accounted for multiple kills. Her pilots reported fires visible from 60 miles away. Truk burned like Dante's Inferno, and the ship kept moving. The Philippines, Palau, the Marianas. Enterprise was everywhere, launching strikes, recovering aircraft, refueling at sea, pushing westward toward Japan itself. Her crew noticed something. Japanese pilots were getting worse. The skilled, experienced aviators from Pearl Harbor, Midway, and Santa Cruz were dead. Replacements were younger, less trained, more desperate. But there were more of them. So many more. And they were willing to die. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. On June 19, 1944, in the Philippine Sea west of the Mariana Islands, the Imperial Japanese Navy made its last great carrier offensive. The Japanese combined fleet sortied 9 carriers, 5 battleships, and dozens of escorts. They launched over 400 aircraft in multiple waves against Task Force 58. They called it Operation Ago, the decisive battle that would destroy the American carrier fleet and turn the tide of the war. American pilots called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Enterprise, now part of the largest carrier task force ever assembled, launched her fighters. F-6F Hellcats, faster, better armed, better protected than anything the Japanese had, tore into the attacking formations with devastating efficiency. The American pilots were better trained. Their aircraft were superior. Their tactics were refined through 3 years of brutal combat. And they had radar. Enterprise's radar operators vectored fighters to intercept Japanese formations long before they reached the fleet. The slaughter was absolute. Wave after wave of Japanese aircraft were shot down. Some never reached the American carriers. Those that did faced a wall of anti-aircraft fire so dense it was nearly solid. By the end of the day, the Japanese had lost over 600 aircraft and 3 carriers. American losses: 123 aircraft, most to fuel exhaustion while searching for the fleeing Japanese fleet, and minor damage to a few ships. Enterprise's pilots claimed dozens of kills. Her gunners shot down multiple attackers. Her radar operators controlled the battle. And the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Force ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. They had no trained pilots left, no carriers left, no hope left. Japan's carrier warfare capability, the same force that had struck Pearl Harbor and terrorized the Pacific, had been annihilated in one day. And Enterprise, bloodied veteran of Midway, Santa Cruz, and Guadalcanal, sailed on toward the Philippines. Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle. In October 1944, General Douglas MacArthur returned to the Philippines. He waded ashore at Leyte, declared, "I have returned," and set in motion the liberation of the Philippine Islands. The Japanese response was desperate and massive. They sortied nearly every remaining warship in the Imperial Japanese Navy, 4 separate task forces, including the super battleships Yamato and Musashi, converging on Leyte Gulf to annihilate the American invasion fleet. The Battle of Leyte Gulf lasted 4 days, October 23 to 26, 1944. It remains the largest naval battle in history. Over 200,000 men, nearly 400 ships, thousands of aircraft. Enterprise was there. On October 24th, American carrier aircraft attacked the Japanese center force, which included Yamato, Musashi, and multiple heavy cruisers. Enterprise's aircraft joined the attacks. Musashi, the largest battleship ever built, absorbed an incredible 19 torpedo hits and 17 bomb hits before finally capsizing and sinking. On October 25th, the Battle off Samar erupted when a Japanese surface force surprised a group of American escort carriers. In desperation, the escort carriers' aircraft attacked battleships and cruisers with whatever they had: bombs, torpedoes, depth charges, even empty guns making strafing runs to distract Japanese gunners. Enterprise and the fleet carriers raced to help, launching strikes. By the time they arrived, the Japanese were already retreating, driven off by suicidal courage from the escort carrier pilots and destroyer crews. And then, the kamikazes came. On October 25, 1944, Japan launched the first organized kamikaze attacks of the war. 5 escort carriers were hit. Multiple ships were damaged, but Enterprise wasn't touched. Not this day. The Battle of Leyte Gulf ended in complete American victory. The Imperial Japanese Navy was shattered. 4 carriers sunk. 3 battleships sunk. 10 cruisers sunk. 11 destroyers sunk. Japan's navy would never again sortie as a unified fleet, but the kamikazes had proven effective. More would come. Many more. Acete Fifth, the final battles Iwo Jima and Okinawa. By early 1945, Japan was dying and everyone knew it. American bombers burned Japanese cities with incendiary raids. The Philippines were liberated. The Marianas were American air bases. The home islands were under blockade. But Japan would not surrender. The military code of Bushido forbade it. The emperor had not spoken, and so the war continued, growing more brutal with every passing month. In February 1945, Enterprise supported the invasion of Iwo Jima, the volcanic island 760 miles from Tokyo that would become one of the most iconic battles in American military history. Her aircraft struck Japanese positions. Her fighters flew combat air patrol. Her pilots watched as Marines died by the thousands in the black volcanic sand. In April 1945, Enterprise supported the invasion of Okinawa, the last stepping stone before Japan itself. The battle would rage for 82 days. Over 12,000 Americans would die. Over 100,000 Japanese soldiers and Okinawan civilians would perish. And the kamikazes came in waves. Operation Kikusui, floating chrysanthemums, the Japanese called it. 10 massive kamikaze operations, each launching hundreds of suicide aircraft against the American fleet. The goal wasn't military victory. It was attrition. Bleed the Americans. Make them pay in blood for every mile. Make the cost of invading Japan so terrible that they would negotiate peace. Enterprise fought through it all. Her fighter pilots flew constant combat air patrol, intercepting kamikazes before they reached the fleet. Her gunners shot down dozens of suicide attackers. Her radar operators tracked incoming raids and vectored fighters to intercept. On April 11, 1945, a kamikaze broke through and dove at Enterprise. The ship's gunners opened fire. 40mm Bofors rounds shredded the aircraft. It crashed 50 yards from the ship, throwing water across the deck. On April 16th, another kamikaze attacked. Enterprise twisted hard to port. The suicide plane missed by yards, crashing into the ocean so close that crew members on deck could see the pilot's face. Enterprise was lucky. Other ships weren't. The carrier USS Bunker Hill was hit by 2 kamikazes and suffered 396 killed and 264 wounded. The carrier USS Franklin was nearly sunk. Dozens of destroyers, cruisers, and support ships were hit. The sea around Okinawa was a graveyard, but Enterprise kept fighting. Her crew was exhausted, jumpy, running on adrenaline and coffee. They'd been at war for 3.5 years. They'd seen friends die. They'd buried shipmates at sea. They'd fought across the Pacific from Pearl Harbor to the shores of Japan itself. And they were so close to the end. May 14, 1945. The Gray Ghost bleeds. On May 14, 1945, at 6:56 a.m., Enterprise's radar detected a large inbound raid, 40 to 50 aircraft. Combat air patrol was launched immediately. Fighters were vectored to intercept. Most of the raid was destroyed before it reached the fleet. American F-6F Hellcats tore through the formation. Anti-aircraft fire from the screening destroyers shot down more. But a few broke through. At 7:05 a.m., a single Mitsubishi, a 6M0 fighter, piloted by 21-year-old Tomi Zai, appeared through the clouds. He dove at Enterprise at full speed. Enterprise executed an emergency turn to starboard, her engines screaming. Every gun that could bear opened fire. Tracers filled the sky. The Zero should have missed. Every calculation said it would miss. But Tomi Zai, in his final seconds of life, rolled his aircraft inverted and dove beneath Enterprise's turning radius. He pulled up at the last moment and slammed into the forward elevator at 350 miles per hour. The explosion was catastrophic. The forward elevator, a massive steel platform weighing 20 tons, was blown 400 feet into the air. It flipped end over end and crashed back down onto the flight deck, smashing through and causing secondary explosions. Fires erupted, aviation gasoline ignited, ammunition cooked off. The forward part of the flight deck was a crater. 14 men died instantly. 68 were wounded. Damage control parties raced forward into the flames. They fought the fires with foam and water. They dragged wounded men from the wreckage. They sealed compartments and prevented the fires from spreading to the hangar deck, where loaded aircraft could have caused a chain reaction that would destroy the ship. In 30 minutes, the fires were under control. In 2 hours, the aft elevator was recovering aircraft. Enterprise limped toward Ulithi Atoll for repairs. Her forward flight deck was wrecked. Her crew was traumatized. She was hurt worse than she'd ever been hurt before. And for the third time, Japanese headquarters announced they had sunk USS Enterprise. For the third time, they were wrong. But this time, Enterprise was done. She'd been hit too many times, patched too many times, fought too many battles. The newest Essex-class carriers were bigger, faster, better equipped. The war was nearly over. Germany had surrendered on May 8th. Japan was collapsing. Enterprise was ordered home. After 20 battle stars, after nearly every major naval engagement of the Pacific War, after 3.5 years of constant combat, after being sunk 3 times by Japanese propaganda and never once by Japanese weapons, the Gray Ghost was going home. Victory and the end. On June 7, 1945, Enterprise arrived at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bremerton, Washington. Thousands of people lined the docks. Bands played. Banners welcomed her home. Her crew, exhausted, haunted, aged beyond their years, walked down the gangplank onto American soil. Many wept. Some fell to their knees and kissed the ground. They'd survived. Against all odds, they'd survived. Enterprise underwent repairs, but the war ended before she could return to combat. On August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb destroyed Hiroshima. On August 9th, a second destroyed Nagasaki. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender in a radio broadcast. The war was over. Enterprise had won. She had fought in 20 major battles and numerous raids. She had earned 20 battle stars, more than any other U.S. warship in history. Her aircraft had sunk or damaged 71 ships, shot down 911 enemy aircraft, and destroyed hundreds more on the ground. She had been reported sunk by Japanese propaganda 3 times, and survived every time. She was the most decorated ship in the United States Navy. A legend. An icon. The Gray Ghost. Closing. The scrapping of a legend. After the war, Enterprise served briefly as a transport, bringing American servicemen home from the Pacific. But by 1946, the Navy had newer, better carriers. Enterprise was outdated, worn out, expensive to maintain. In 1946, she was decommissioned and placed in reserve. Veterans groups lobbied to preserve her as a museum ship. Admirals testified before Congress. Halsey himself pleaded for Enterprise to be saved. She was too important, too legendary to be scrapped. But America was tired of war. Budgets were tight. The Cold War was beginning. And there were too many ships, too many memorials, too many causes competing for limited funds. In 1958, after sitting in reserve for 12 years, Enterprise was sold for scrap. She was towed to Kearney, New Jersey, and broken apart. Her steel was melted down. Her guns were removed. Her history was scattered. By 1960, the most decorated warship in American naval history no longer existed, except as a legend. Her name lives on. The nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Enterprise, CVN-65, commissioned in 1961, carried the name with pride. The current USS Enterprise, CVN-80, now under construction, will carry it forward. And every naval aviator, every carrier sailor, every student of naval history knows the story of CV-6, the Gray Ghost, the ship that wouldn't sink, the ship that was reported destroyed 3 times and came back every time, the ship that fought at Midway, Santa Cruz, Guadalcanal, the Philippine Sea, and Leyte Gulf, the ship that earned 20 battle stars, more than any other American warship, the ship that, when America was losing the Pacific War, when the battleships burned at Pearl Harbor and the Japanese seemed unstoppable, stepped forward and said, "Not on my watch." USS Enterprise, CV-6, the Gray Ghost, the ship that saved America.